We've got Brent crude prices which are sitting at around $125 a barrel, and just my previous guest was saying that we might just see oil hitting very close to that all-time high that we saw in 2008. Energy is something that South Africa is very cognizant of, and many say that shale gas is the answer. Do you agree with that?
I think that it's tried to say that a lot of money can be generated and energy can be generated from the exploitation of shale gas. But the jury is still out, particularly in countries like South Africa where we don't have a shale gas industry. And what is required in our economy is a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis on this technology. I think something that we're also not realizing as a country is that when Shell and others talk about exploiting shale gas, people get the impression that it's something that would happen next year. In Shell's own figures, they're talking about a 9, 10, 11-year time period to start developing production of this resource. There are alternatives, and while the jury is out internationally on the safety and efficacy of shale gas from an environmental point of view, we are not convinced by the facts.
Jonathon, if we could just also touch on the economic implication here, because yes, it could take 9 to 10 years to actually start the process or actually benefit from the process. We know that a lot of jobs could be created in the interim, and then after that we could become energy independent. I mean, that's quite a big carrot to swing to policymakers and of course to the consumers as well.
Yeah, there are two aspects to that. Certainly the energy carrot is enticing. Bearing in mind that it is a fossil fuel and that it's unsustainable. It may well, depending on reserves, have a lot of potential for South Africa for a decade or more. But eventually, just like all of the fossil fuels, it will be depleted. And South Africa can do a lot better by pursuing renewable energy. If you look at what countries like Spain have achieved, it's absolutely remarkable. And we have great potential for renewable energy in this country, not only from an energy generation point of view, but also from a point of view of creating jobs. And a recent report that was floated by Shell, that was commissioned and done by Econometrics, talks about some fairly significant job figures. Mr. Piet de Plooy from the Trade and Industry Policy Strategies disagreed with a number of those figures, and his numbers were backed up by the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So it's not always as rosy as the oil and gas industry would make it out to be.
So, Jonathon, I mean, when we see what's happening with sanctions against Iran as an example, and now we know that a lot of the oil refineries are very dependent on Iranian oil, and here we are grappling to try and find alternative sources. I mean, if things like this happen, because I think it's fair to say that even over the last 3 decades, there's been trouble with the Middle East and oil out of that region, that we will then be protected from the geopolitical scenarios that could be playing out. So yes, it is fair to say we need to diversify even into renewable energy, but couldn't it in some way also protect us from some of the geopolitical tensions that could occur in the future?
It certainly could. Of course, our refineries can also handle Venezuelan crude, which has the same sort of basic characteristics as the Iranian crude. And we have our very own good coal to liquid fuel technology in this country, which has served South Africa very well in times of international shortages. So I believe that South Africa, with our abundant coal reserves, is blessed with an opportunity to continue this while we look for a truly sustainable bridge to our future energy needs.
Okay, so let's also just touch on, I know that you're quite a big activist in terms of ensuring that no harm and danger is brought to the Karoo, because it is a very important part. Within South Africa, we've got an energy shortage, and then we also have a water shortage. You're talking about the fact that it's not sustainable down the line because it is a fossil fuel. You know, when you look at some of the pros and the cons there, Jonathon, obviously you're leaning more towards ensuring that there is a high protection of the environment.
Well, it's not necessarily just a focus on the environment. I was at a shale gas conference this week, and one of the speakers, Dr. Chris Hart-Nady, presented a very interesting diagram in terms of costing in the cost of actually developing this energy. And if you look at our natural capital that would be consumed, things like water and the ability of our land to provide agriculture, those are costs that need to be factored in. And traditionally, by the oil and gas industry, of course, those costs are ignored. They tend to look at things from a very insular viewpoint. And from an environmental point of view, certainly while I'm speaking to you today, fracking or hydraulic fracturing is banned or under some form of moratorium or restriction in at least 124 places around the world. And until there are answers, more convincing answers, for instance, in places like why Bulgaria and countries like France have banned the process, we certainly are calling for a far more detailed investigation and a strategic environmental assessment for this country in our own conditions and by our own people.
And Jonathon, here I am holding my head saying, well, okay, we've got to literally pick between the likes of coal and nuclear and the other dirtier energies that come to the fore, and you just have to pick the lesser of the evils. Renewable energy hopefully will play a bigger part in energy creation in South Africa, but surely is not going to overtake any of these dirty resources.
Certainly, it's not going to provide the base load that the country requires in the short term. But the jury is also out, to use one of my favorite terms, on the degree to which shale gas is cleaner burning than coal, if one looks at all of the emissions. There are very significant conflicting scientific opinions from credible scientists on both sides of the debate. And it's not necessarily a given that shale gas is that much cleaner than coal when considered across the whole production process. So what I'm saying to you is, we have a source of energy in this country that's supplying our demand. We are exporters. We are major exporters of coal. So we're not short of this energy producing resource. There's a lot of employment in South Africa that is dependent on coal, and there are 2 big coal power stations that are currently being completed. So South Africa can't just make a switch midstream to this type of thing, where with renewables, the technology is modular. It can be deployed quickly. It can be deployed from a residential point of view and a small industrial point of view. There's an enormous amount that South Africa can do to solve some of these things, whilst we look after our liquid fuel needs from a source like Sasol, for instance.
Fantastic.
If the international supply becomes a big issue.